Okay, so this is going to be a tutorial lesson on using TinkerCAD to create the time capsule tutorial as part of your 3D modeling for 3D printing project. So once you have followed the instructions on Edsby, which I'll just go to Edsby here to show you again. So you're going to tinkercad.com/join class, enter in the class code, which you can copy and paste straight from Edsby here, as well as you have a handout for it. Log in with your nickname, which again is your first and last name joined together, no capitals, no spaces, no special characters. That will bring you to your TinkerCAD dashboard. Now, if you've already started some work, you may see some work in 3D designs as I have here. You may see some work under lessons for things that you have been working towards completing. But to get started, we're going to go to the Learn tab at the top. And again, if you've never used 3D modeling before or TinkerCAD as a platform for 3D modeling before, I highly recommend you go to the starter lessons first. So just go into the see all starters, complete all of these to get an idea of what it is that you're going to be doing as part of 3D modeling. And then we can jump into the project design. So I've already done this, so I'm going to go right to projects. I'm going to go to see all projects, and then I'm looking for the time capsule. There it is. And then again, you have a lesson or series of lessons depending which tutorial you're doing. You're doing two of these, so one is the time capsule, the other one is the container with the locking lid. I am only going to be doing the time capsule in this video. I've already completed this before, so I'm going to hit restart project, which deletes all of my progress previously on this lesson. So just be aware that if you do hit restart project, that is basically you saying that you are done starting over again and you're going to lose all of your work thus far on this assignment. So I'm going to go to the Start tab and launch the time capsule lesson. And again, all of the information that TinkerCAD provides to you is on the left. Your work area is in the middle. All of your objects for designing are going to be on the right, and your tools are going to be along the top that we're going to refer to. So I'm going to follow through the instructions that are written here on the left, and I'm going to give you guys a couple of adaptations or a few things that may help you to complete these steps as you go along. So first thing, step one, place a box on the work plane. So I'm going to find the box, select it, and place it on my work plane. Okay, now it wants me to scale the box so the dimensions equal 2.5 millimeters for height, 20 millimeters for width, and 32 millimeters for length. So I'm going to click on my node for the width and drag this out, and I'm looking to get this to 32 millimeters, and I'll make that my length across the side here. Now one little note, I'm going to do it this way for this one, get it to 32, but if I wanted to, instead of clicking and dragging front to back to set my width to 20, is I could simply click and type in a number. Okay, so this does need to be 20, which it already is, so I would just type in 20, hit enter, and it changes the size. The height, I'm going to change this to 2.5, so I'm going to hit 2.5, and it just sets it nicely right to that measurement that I want this object to be. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in here so I can see what I'm doing, and I'm doing that just by rolling the wheel of my mouse or using my scroll feature on my trackpad of my laptop if that's what I'm using to zoom in. Third step here is to place a round roof onto the work plane and scale it so that the length is the same as the box at 32 for the width. And same, now we're going to go 17 for front to back, and we're going to go to 9 millimeters for our height. So we're changing it a little different here. So I'm going to look for that round roof. There it is. I'm going to place this in. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this so it matches my profile. And just like with that measurements, I can change my angle of rotation by simply typing it in and getting my measurement set to that for the angle. So I'm going to get this so it's the same. So I'm going 32 as well. My front to back, now I'm going to be switching this to 17 from 20, and my height I'm going to be setting to 9. So I'm taking 1 millimeter off the height there. Now it's asking me to hold the shift key and click on both box and round roof to select them. Then in the upper right corner, choose the align tool, and then use the pointers to move these into position. So I will be moving these to the center tab and the front to back center tab. So I'm centering these both on the X and Y axes. So I can click on one object, hold the shift key, select the other object, Another option would be to click and drag a selection box, or because these are the only two objects I have, I can hit Control All. So I'm going to go up to my Align option. I'm going to center these front to back, center these side to side, which is my X and Y axes, and now these objects are centered. So I'm moving on now to step 6, which is to select the box and choose a duplicate feature so that I can create another one of these objects. And I'm going to move my duplicate down 2.5 millimeters. So I'm going to select this box. I am going to duplicate that, which I have a duplicate feature here, or it says I can push Control and D. So I've duplicated that, and I'm going to move my duplicate down 2.5. And again, with my move features, I can select the dialog box that comes up and type in that measurement if I prefer. Now I'm going to change the height of my duplicate to be 10. And there it is. And then the top box and the round roof, and I'm going to group them together. So I'm actually going to take this new box that I made, I'm going to set it off to the side so that I can group this round roof and the first box that I made together. So I've selected them both. I go to group, and it will group them together. And now I can change the color of these, and it will make it be the same for the entire object. So now that I've done that, we're going to turn this into a metal band. Okay, so I'm going to select the top box and the round roof, and I will duplicate them. And then I'm going to set the width of that duplicate to be 2.5 millimeters. So I'm just going to type that in, 2.5 millimeters. I'm also going to change the color of this so it's a little easier to see what I've got going on here. And my duplicate, I am going to scale the width of the duplicate down to 2.5 millimeters. I'm going to ungroup these objects so that I can work with the round roof and the square that I made separately. And I'm going to scale the object's height and width about 1 millimeter from the lid surface. Okay, so I'm going to select this object. I'm going to ungroup. And then what I'm looking to do is just make these a little bit bigger. So I'm going to take the 17, I'm going to make it 19. I'm going to take my height of 9, I'm going to make it 10. And I'm going to recenter this onto my objects just so I can see my spacing. I'm going to get that second box that I made up, and I'm going to change it about 1 millimeter. So it protrudes out 1 millimeter from my roof, and I'm going to do the same here for the height. So I'll make this 3.5. I'll realign these up, centered them on the front, on the bottom, and then I can rotate around here and we'll see what we've got protruding out. So if you look, I've got a uniform curve going on here around my roof. I've got a uniform protrusion at the top and the side, and that's going to mimic what's shown here of having that box just sit a little bit above the original. So I can now take these two objects, so I'll hold that shift key, select these two objects, group these together, and I'm just going to switch the color to black because in the diagram it shows it as being black, so I'm just going to match that for now because it'll play in later. So I've grouped those two objects together, which is step 10. Step 11 is to take the metal band that I've selected, which I have, and I'm going to duplicate it and move a new band over 9 millimeters. So I'm going to go to duplicate, and then I'm going to shift this over 9 millimeters. Again, if I'm moving this just with my mouse cursor or my trackpad, I can move it front to back and side to side, which can make it a little bit cumbersome, especially if it's a trackpad. So a way to just lock this down and get it perfect is use those dialog boxes, set your front to back movement to 0 so that it stays centered, and then using the measurements, I'm moving it in a negative reference to the original, so I'm going to go -9, which moves it over the 9 millimeters. And once I've done this once, the nice part is I'm going to duplicate this again. Because if I go to here, it shows me that I'm looking that in the example, I want 4 of these bands to be made up for my roof. So if I hit duplicate, it's going to make a new one, and it's automatically spacing it at that 9 millimeters. Do it again for a fourth. object, and now I've got these set into place. So it's remembered my move, my scale, and everything, so let's put that into place. I'm going to select all my metal bands and I'm going to group them. Now what I want to do is I want to get these bands so that they're centered on my lid, so I'm going to hold that shift key and I'm going to select all 4 of my bands, and even though they're not connecting, I can group them together so that now when I select that with the lid and I center this, now my bands are centered on my lid, and now I can select all these objects, group them together, and get a nice new uniform lid. Now what I can do here too is this has just turned it all into one color, is I'm going to just actually ungroup it, switch the red color of this lid to a brown, so it's like a wooden box. Select all my objects, group these together, and what I can do to create that separation of color between the metal bands and the wooden box is go to multicolor under my color options. And it brings back that division, but it's still joined together as one object. So now that I've got that, I'm going to move my lid off to the side. I'm going to bring my bottom into play, and I'm actually going to lift it up so it's on the work plane. So I'm just going to hit the D button, which drops it on the work plane. And I'm going to be looking to make a duplicate of the container, and I'm going to scale it down until the edges are about 2 to 3 millimeters from the original box. Okay, so I'm going to make a duplicate of this, and I'm going to scale this down. So I want to make this about 2 to 3 millimeters smaller. So I'm going to take 3 millimeters off, so I'm going to make it 29. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to take 3 millimeters off, so it's going to be 7. And I'm also going to lift this up 3 millimeters so that I have a bottom of that 3 millimeters as well. Okay, so I've done that, and now I'm going to I will be turning this inner box into a hole. I'm going to duplicate it though first because I want to make a little tab on my lid that I can set into this hole. So I'm going to duplicate this, move it off to the side because I'll use that with my lid later. And then I am going to be scaling this new shape so that it has a height of 1 to 2 millimeters. So I'm going to take this down. I'm going to make it 2 millimeters. There we go. And now I can turn the inner box into a hole. So there's my inner box. I'm going to make it a hole. And I'm going to take these 2 objects. I'm going to first align them so that they're centered. So my hole is right in the middle. And then I can group these together so that it's cut out. And I'm going to change the color of this so it's the same brown wood tone of my lid. Okay, so I've done exactly what's shown in the example steps here, cutting that out. Now I'm going to take this new shape that I've made, I'm going to drop it to the work plane, and what I'm going to do with these 2 objects is I'm going to set the lid on top and join these together. So one trick I can do with this is I can set my work plane to being the top of an object by hitting the W key, click on the top of my object, and now when I take this new object and my lid, select those, and I align these, it's using the top of the new object as my work plane, so that now these objects, when I take the lid and hit that D key, watch it right here, it's below the work plane. When I push the D key, it's going to lift it up, and it's right on top of my object. So now I could group these together and join them as one piece. So I'm going to reset my work plane by hitting the W key again, push the selection off somewhere where there's nothing to select, and then I'm going to be grouping my lid with that new box. So I'm going to switch the color of this new box so that it's also brown, and then I'm going to group these objects together. There's my lid together, and what I can do just as a check is I'll just lift the lid over top of the box, and I can just make sure that these are going to be matching by zooming in and rotating to see that the openings are going to match up well enough, and that it's going to sit inside with no worry. Now I could even further fit that together if I wanted to by ungrouping these and changing the scale of this box a little bit. So what I'm going to do here is this got tweaked I'll make it the same 29, and I'll take this and I'll make it the same 17. Select this and my lid, align these together side to side, align these together front to back, and now I'll regroup them together. And what I should find is that these are going to now match properly to the opening nice. So there's not going to be any slop for that lid to move back and forth. And this is going to give me a nice good seal. And I can check that by changing the bottom form into a hole, and I can take my lid and just drop it down so that it would be setting that notch into the opening. And what I should see is that these pieces are lining up, which you can see here the edges are. So that means that my lid would fit nicely into my base with the little notch fitting into the opening, creating my time capsule form. Okay. And I can even tweak this further. If I don't like the wall thickness, I can ungroup these objects, move my lid out of the way. I can drop this down, create a smaller wall thickness. So I can make this 1.5. Now it's going to be uniform with my sides so that the opening of the object is going to be centered and uniform all the way around the walls at the bottom. I could set it so that this wall thickness becomes smaller. I could set it so the wall thickness becomes bigger, but all I would need to do would be to change this object that I added to the bottom of my lid, my little notch, so it matches the interior opening so that the lid fits snug with the base. So I'll switch that back to a color, turn that so it's matching wood brown, and that gets me my lid set, and it's doing that same visual for that check to reference to make sure that this is going to fit inside of the opening with that notch. So the last step here is to make it unique, your own, add some text. I'm going to take it a step further for making it unique. So I'm going to take the lid and I'm going to duplicate it and set this lid off to the side. And this will be the lid that I keep. And this first lid that I had is the one that I'm going to use for creating a little bit of a decoration onto my box. So I'm going to ungroup this form, and I'm going to actually move that roof line, delete my notch, ungroup this one more time, remove that roof, round roof and box that I made. So I just have my metal bands, and I'll ungroup these as well and remove all of the round roofs that make up my metal bands. So all I'm left with is my 9mm spaced squares that make up the metal bands, and I'm just going to change the size of this to match my box. I'll change the color of these to match the color of my bands, and I'm just going to group this after I select these, get my base aligned so that they're centered. And what this does is puts metal bands running on the box as well. And I could even take it a step further and bring the bands down so that I could, for example, stretch these up to 11 and drop these down a millimeter. And now it even sets below the box as well as on the sides, just to make it even fancier. But I don't really like the look of that, so I'm going to go back to the way I had it. Now, what you need to do before you group these bands onto the box is, because we've created the hole previously, these bands will end up making dividers. So what I want to do is ungroup my box. I'll select my outer box, get it back to that brown color, and then select everything, group it together, and what it'll do is it will cut that opening out of all of my solid objects. Okay, and then I could further add text to that. So I can type in my text. I'm going to follow the design in here. I'll do open in 2030. Oh, holding the shift key for too long. I'm going to set my height to be 4 millimeters. I'm not going to bother with bevel or anything like that, but one thing I am going to need to do is shrink this down. So I'm going to make this be 30, and we're going to make this be 10. See what our text looks like here. Still probably a little bit big, so I think what we'll do is just shrink it down a little bit further. Take this to 25, and we'll take this down to 7. Okay, so there we go. I'm going to change this color to a nice bright yellow so it stands out. I'm going to rotate, and just like with the, again, size and scale, as I can type in the numbers for my rotation. I'm going to have to rotate this some more because you can see it's not coming through the way I want, where I can actually read this. And this is upside down, so let's turn it. There we go. Okay, so now I can select my box. I'll align these so that they are centered. We'll put them right up at the front and align it in the middle. Now, in order to make sure that my text is visible, I am going to pull it out of the front of my object. I'm going to make sure that this stays at a centered measurement. And I'm going to also take this back and use the same trick that I did with my bands so that the hole gets cut through the text, but I can still read all my text. And I can further play with this. If I don't like that height, maybe I take this down to 5. Play with my align tool again, get this centered back up at the top. And if I'm happy with that, I'll use my same trick. So I'm going to ungroup my base, select all the objects, group them together, and it'll take that whole of my interior object. It's going to cut it from my text as well as from my tabs. And I'll switch this back to a multicolor, and there's my nice bright yellow text, my black metal bands, and my brown wooden time capsule box. So this completes the tutorial, as it says at the end for step 20. Ta-da! We are done. Customized it. We've even taken it a step further. Now, if this was my project and I was going to take this for 3D printing, I need to export this as an STL. For the purposes of this tutorial, you're still going to export it as an STL. So there's a couple things you need to follow. Number one, the lid needs to be separate from the box. I cannot have this lid sitting on top of this box in any way, shape, or form, because what it will do is take that and print it as one solid object, and that inside cavity will never be accessible. So I have to print it as 2 separate parts. So I need this lid off of the base, and I need both objects dropped onto the work plane. So with your objects selected, hit that D button on your keyboard just to make sure that they are dropped on the work plane so that they would be flat on the print bed. And then when I go to print, if you imagine the work plane as the printer print bed, if I put my lid up at the front and I put my base all the way at the back, when the printer goes to print this, it's going to move around for the layer for the lid, and then it's going to have to move all the way to the opposite corner of the print bed to print the layer for the base. That's going to take a lot of time, and you have a limited amount of time for your project to print it in. So in order to speed up the process for you, I would recommend that you move your 2 objects so that they are in fairly close proximity so that the printer doesn't have to move very far. Okay, so they can sit fairly close together. And just to make it, again, a little bit easier on the printer and reduce print time, we'll center them. And then where they get placed together on the work plane really doesn't matter, because if I put these together at the front corner here, the printer's still only going to print from the area that it's needing to print the base and then move to the area where it needs to print the lid. If I do that in the back of the print bed, it's still going to be working in that same space. If I put it in the center, nothing changes. So now that I've got these two objects set, this could go to the printer, but for the purposes of this, again, you're just going to be submitting it for marking. So what we're going to do is go up to the top, hit export, and you're going to choose STL. It's going to prepare this file for printing, and it's going to export it as an STL file, which is what we need to create a file for G-code, which is what runs the 3D printer. And then in EDSB, you will find an assignment that will be titled TinkerCAD Time Capsule. All you're going to do is submit the assignment for the TinkerCAD Time Capsule by uploading your STL file there. And you'll do the same thing when you are doing your work for the locking container with lid, so that you have both of those objects exported as a 3D print file or STL file, so that they could in theory be printed, but the one that will actually be printed is the project. Okay, so that is the lesson on TinkerCAD for 3D modeling and creating the time capsule. And again, this is going to save your progress. So if I do go back to my main dashboard, find a design that is create a time capsule. And if you go to lessons, you'll also find the lesson on create a time capsule, and it will take you back right to where you were, the step that you were at. So if you don't get it done in one go, that's fine. And again, you can always find it again by going to the Learn tab, Projects, and just going back into the Project section, finding the time capsule, and resuming your work. Okay, so that's the time capsule. There'll be a video coming out for the container with the locking lid soon. And as always, folks, pitter patter.